Hello, back with another reading of a short story by this one by Fyodor Dostoevsky, The Unpleasant Predicament. I'm getting this from Gutenberg. I believe the translator is Constant Gardner, but don't quote me on that. This is an 1862 work by by Fyodor Dostoevsky. An Unpleasant Predicament. This unpleasant business occurred at the epoch when the regeneration of our beloved fatherland and the struggles of her valiant sons towards new hopes and destinies was beginning with irresistible force and with a touching naive impetuosity. One winter evening in that period, between 11 and 12 o'clock, three highly respectable gentlemen were sitting in a comfortable and even luxuriously furnished room in a handsome house of 2 stories on the Petersburg side, and were engaged in a staid and edifying conversation on a very interesting subject. These 3 gentlemen were all of general's rank. They were sitting round a little table, each in a soft, handsome armchair, and as they talked, they quietly and luxuriously sipped champagne. The bottle stood on the table on a silver stand with ice around it. The fact was that the host, a privy councillor called Stefan Nikiforovitch Nikiforov, an old bachelor, Stefan Nikiforovitch Nikiforovo, an old bachelor of 65, was celebrating his removal into a house that he had just bought, and as it happened, also his birthday, which he had never kept before. The festivity, however, was not on the very grand scale. As we have seen already, there were only 2 guests, both of them former colleagues and former subordinates of Nikiforov. Nikiforov. That is, an actual civil councillor called Semyon Ivanovich Shipulenko, and another actual civil councillor, Ivan Ilyich Perlinsky. They had arrived to tea at about 9 o'clock, and then had begun upon the wine, and knew that at exactly 11:30 they would have to set off home. Their host had all his life been fond of regularity. A few words about him. He had begun his career as a petty clerk with nothing to back him, had quietly plodded on for 45 years, knew very well what to work towards, and had no ambition to draw the stars down from heaven, though he had 2 stars already, and particularly disliked expressing his own opinion on any subject. He was honest, too, that is, it did not happen to him to do anything particularly dishonest. He was a bachelor because he was an egotist. He had plenty of brains, but he could not bear showing his intelligence. He particularly disliked slovenliness and enthusiasm, regarding it as moral slovenliness, and towards the end of his life had become completely absorbed in a voluptuous, indolent comfort and systematic solitude. Though he sometimes visited people of a rather higher rank than his own, yet from his youth up he could never endure entertaining visitors himself, and of late he had, if he did not play a game of patience, been satisfied with the society of his dining-room clock, and would spend the whole evening dozing in his armchair, listening placidly to its ticking under its glass on the chimney-piece. In appearance he was closely shaven and extremely proper-looking. He was well preserved, looking younger than his age. He promised to go on living many years longer, and closely followed the rules of the highest good breeding. His post was a fairly comfortable one. He had to preside somewhere and to sign something. In short, he was regarded as a first-rate man. He had only one passion, or more accurately, one keen desire. That was to have his own house, and a house built like a gentleman's residence, not a commercial investment. His desire was at last realized. He looked out and bought a house on the Petersburg side. A good way off, it is true, but it had a garden, and was an elegant house. The new owner decided that it was better for being a good way off. He did not like entertaining at home. and for driving to see anyone or to the office he had a handsome carriage of a chocolate hue, a coachman, Mahini, and two little but strong and handsome horses. All this was honorably acquired by the careful frugality of 40 years, so that his heart rejoiced over it. This was how it was that Stefan Nikiforovitch felt such pleasure in his placid heart that he actually had invited two friends to see him on his birthday, which he had hitherto carefully concealed from his most intimate acquaintances. He had special designs on one of these visitors. He lived in the upper story of his new house, and he wanted a tenant for the lower half, which was built and arranged in exactly the same way. Stefan Nikiforovitch was reckoning upon Semyon Ivanovitch Shiplenko, and had twice that evening broached the subject in the course of conversation. But Semyon Ivanovitch made no response. The latter, too, was a man who had doggedly made a way for himself in the course of long years. He had black hair and whiskers, and a face that was always a shade of jaundice. He was a married man of morose disposition, who liked to stay at home. He ruled his household with a rod of iron. In his official duties he had the greatest confidence. He, too, knew perfectly well that what goal he was making for, and better still, what he would never reach. He was in good position, and he was sitting tight there. He looked upon the new reforms with a certain distaste. He was not particularly agitated about them. He was extremely self-confident, and listened with a shade of ironical malice to Ivan Ilyich Pralinsky expatiating on new themes. All of them had been drinking rather freely, however, so that Stefan Nikiforovitch himself condescended to take part in a slight discussion with Mr. Pralinsky concerning the latest reforms. But we must say a few words about His Excellency Mr. Pralinsky, especially as he is the chief hero of the present story. The actual civil councillor, Ivan Ilyich Pralinsky, had only been His Excellency for 4 months. In short, he was a young general. He was young in years, too, only 43, no more, and he looked and liked to look even younger. He was a tall, handsome man. He was smart in his dress, and prided himself on its solid, dignified character with great aplomb. He displayed an order of some consequence on his breast. From his earliest childhood he had known how to acquire the airs and graces of aristocratic society, and being a bachelor, dreamed of a wealth and even aristocratic bride. He dreamed of many other things, though he was far from being stupid. At times he was a great talker, and even liked to assume a parliamentary pose. He came of a good family. He was the son of a general, and brought up in the lap of luxury. In his tender childhood he had been dressed in velvet and fine linen, had been educated at an aristocratic school, and though he acquired very little learning there, he was successful in the service, and had worked his way up to being a general. The authorities looked upon him as a capable man, and even expected great things of him in the future. Stefan Nikiforovitch, under whom Ivan Ilyich had begun his career in the service, and under whom he had remained until he was made a general, had never considered him a good business man, and had no expectations of him whatever. What he liked in him was that he belonged to a good family, had property, that is, a big block of buildings, let out in flats in charge of an overseer, was connected with persons of consequence, and what was more, had a majestic bearing. Stefan Nikiforovitch blamed him inwardly for excess of imagination and instability. Ivan Ilyich himself felt at times that he had been too much amour propre, and even sensitiveness. Strange to say, he had attacks from time to time of morbid tenderness of conscience, and even a kind of faint remorse. With bitterness and a secret soreness of heart, he recognized now and again that he did not fly so high as he imagined. At such moments he sank into despondency, especially when he was suffering from hemorrhoids, called his life exquisite manique, and ceased, privately of course, to believe even in his parliamentary capacities, calling himself a talker, a maker of phrases, and though all that, of course, did him great credit, it did not in the least prevent him from raising his head again half an hour later, and even growing even more obstinately, even more conceitedly self-confident, and assuring himself that he would yet succeed in making his mark, that he would not be only a great official, but a statesman whom Russia would long remember. He actually dreamed at times of monuments. From this it will be seen that Ivan Ilyich aimed high, though he hid his vague hopes and dreams deep in his heart, even with a certain trepidation. In short, he was a good-natured man and a poet at heart. Of late years these morbid moments of disillusionment had begun to be more frequent. He had become peculiarly irritable, ready to take offense, and was apt to take any contradiction as an affront. But reformed Russia gave him great hopes. His promotion to general was the finishing touch. He was roused. He held his head up. He suddenly began talking freely and eloquently. He talked about the new ideas, which he very quickly and unexpectedly made his own, and professed with vehemence. He sought opportunities for speaking, drove about the town, and in many places succeeded in gaining the reputation of a desperate liberal, which flattered him greatly. That evening, after drinking 4 glasses, he was particularly exuberant. He wanted on every point to confute Stefan Nikiforovitch, which he had not seen for some time past, and whom he had hitherto always respected and even obeyed. He considered him for some reason reactionary, and fell upon him with exceptional heat. Stefan Nikiforovitch hardly answered him, but only listened slyly, though the subject interested him. Ivan Ilyich got hot, and in the heat of the discussion sipped his glass more often than he ought to have done. Then Stefan Nikiforovitch took the bottle and at once filled his glass again, which for some reason seemed to offend Ivan Ilyich, especially as Semyon Ivan Shipelenko, with whom he particularly despised and indeed feared on account of his cynicism and ill nature, preserved a treacherous silence and smiled more frequently than was necessary. They seem to take me for a schoolboy, flashed across Ivan Ilyitch's mind. No, it was time, high time, he went on hotly. We have put it off for too long, and to my thinking humanity is the first consideration, humanity with our inferiors, remembering that they too are men. Humanity will save everything, and bring out all that is. He 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 was heard from the direction of Semyon Ivanovitch. But why are you giving us such a talking to? Stefan Nikiforovitch protested at last, with an affable smile. I must own, Ivan Ilyich, I have not been able to make out, so far, what you are maintaining. You advocate humanity. That is your love of fellow creatures, isn't it? Yes, if you like, Allow me. As far as I can see, that's not the only thing. Love of one's fellow creatures has always been fitting. Reform movement is not confined to that. All sorts of questions have arisen relating to the peasantry, the law courts, economics, government contracts, morals, and those questions are endless, and altogether may give rise to great upheavals, so to say. That is what we have been anxious about, and not simply humanity. Yes, the thing is a bit deeper than that, observed Semyon Ivanovitch. I quite understand, and allow me to observe, Semyon Ivanovitch, that I can't agree to being inferior to you in depth of understanding, Ivan Ilyich observed sarcastically, and with excessive sharpness. However, I will make so bold as to assert, Stefan Nikiforovitch, that you have not understood me either.